Warner Brothers wanted them to ditch the makeup, and Bill Aucoin and the band put their foot down and said, "No, we're sticking with this." They're selling tons and tons of tickets. They're on the covers of magazines. They're getting loads of press. Every record's getting reviewed all over the place.
From the moment Mick and Keith met through to U2 as a high school band in Dublin, how did our biggest music legends make the leap? Passion, talent, luck, and even scandal often came together to propel these stars from obscurity to household name. The stories, the journey, the wild behind the scenes, and much more. I'm Dave Anthony, and I'm the host of From Garage to Stadiums.
Welcome to Garage to Stadiums. Today's story is the story of Kiss. From the streets of New York came four young men, including one born to Holocaust survivors, obsessed from their earliest days with becoming the biggest band in the world. Behind grease paint and fire, they transformed themselves into larger-than-life characters, igniting the imaginations of millions of teenagers. With thunderous riffs, explosive stage shows, and relentless ambition, Kiss became one of the most influential and commercially successful bands in rock history, selling over 100 million albums worldwide. Joining us for a second time is Martin Popoff. Martin joined us on our AC/DC episode, and he's written extensively about today's band, Kiss, including his first book, Kiss at 50 Years, and his most recent work, Kiss 76, which carries the subtitle, The Greatest Year of Rock's Most Dynamic Band. Martin has quite a resume in the hard rock arena. He's officially written more record reviews than anyone in the history of music journalism. In addition, he's penned approximately 135 books on hard rock, heavy metal, classic rock, prog, punk, and record collecting, and has contributed writing to several documentaries that have appeared on VH1 Classic. Martin joins us today from Toronto. Welcome back to Garage to Stadiums, Martin.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. Very cool. I mean, I guess I was one of your very earliest guests, it looks like.
You definitely were. Let's start with the question that a lot of people are going to ask when they see the story of Kiss appearing on their podcast lists. What would you say to people who dismiss Kiss as a novelty act or not to be taken seriously in music circles?
I have strong views about that, actually. Obviously, they with the visuals, they were a novelty act, and people will put down the simplicity of the songs, but I sort of have this theory that you think of your Fleetwood Macs and Eagles and Billy Joels and Tom Petty's, and even to some extent your Beatles early on. Um, their challenge in life, or what they wanted to do, their goal in life is kind of a brill building idea where they're just trying to craft the perfect polished jewel of a song, something pretty modest. It's not jazz, it's not progressive rock, it's not crazy technical heavy metal, it's not classical music. They're literally trying to craft the perfect pop song, with one measure of success being how many people can it connect with, sort of thing. And when you say how many people can it connect with, that generally very quickly means casual music fans. So Kiss is in that same boat.
The four members of the band were bassist Gene Simmons, guitarist Paul Stanley, guitarist Ace Frehley, and drummer Peter Criss. Gene Simmons was born in Haifa, Israel, and his real name at birth, Chaim Vitz. He immigrated to the U.S. from Israel at age 8 with his Holocaust-surviving mom, and they settled in Queens in 1958. Paul Stanley grew up in Washington Heights in northern Manhattan and moved later to Queens, New York. His real name was Stanley Eisen, and he was also born into a Jewish family. He changed his name from Stanley Eisen to Paul Stanley in tribute to Paul McCartney. He was also born with a congenital condition called grade 3 microtia and atresia in his right ear. Essentially, that meant he was missing a large part of that ear, and he also did not have an ear canal, making him deaf in his right ear. To be in the music industry with that kind of handicap shows how determined a character he was. Drummer Peter Criss's real name was George Criscuola, from an Italian-American family living in Brooklyn's Williamsburg neighborhood. Ace Frehley grew up in Bronx, and he was actually born Paul Frehley. He was given the nickname Ace because of his ability to approach girls and set them up with his friends. He took the name Ace to avoid confusion with Paul Stanley, who had previously chosen the first name Paul as his go-forward name. What's interesting is how the two main figures of Kiss initially got off on the wrong foot. Unbeknownst to them, bassist Gene Simmons and guitarist Paul Stanley had a mutual friend who invited them over to his apartment in the Washington Heights neighborhood where Paul also lived. The friend said, "This is my friend Gene," and Gene said to Paul, "Hey, I heard you write music, play me something." Paul found that demand quite smug. In fact, Paul has since commented his first impression of Gene was that he was actually quite opinionated, full of himself, brash, and insulting. Despite some early rough patches, the two bonded over songwriting and formed a band called Wicked Lester.
Wicked Lester, which did not come out at the time, but it's just sort of a generalist rock and roll album as you did back then.
So how did they come up with the name Kiss? Well, Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, and Peter Criss were driving around New York brainstorming new names for the band. Formerly known as Wicked Lester, Criss mentioned that he had previously been in a band called Lips, which sparked Paul Stanley to suggest Kiss. The short word sounded familiar and recognizable, no matter where they toured in the world. And the word is open to interpretation. For example, a passionate kiss or a kiss of death. Shortly after the name was chosen, guitarist Ace Frehley designed their iconic logo, making the final SS look like lightning bolts while doodling on a promotional poster.
At the same time, you've got Neil Bogart breaking away from Buddha Records and starting his own label, Casablanca. So almost in tandem, Kiss becomes not the first thing that Casablanca ever put out, but the first signing and the first LP kind of thing. So it's a short history, not much to it. The early days are spent just trying to make this thing work there in New York.
Let's talk about their, early shows. This is a story, a rapid rise. They performed their first show at the Popcorn Club in Queens, New York. The makeup was worn, but it wasn't until March that the personas were first seen. What happened in March of '73? How'd they come up with these personas?
In fact, it was a rapid rise in a couple of ways. So it was a rapid rise to the first record. It's within a couple of years they get their first record out. And yeah, it's Gene had the idea of coming up with characters. He loved comic books growing up as a kid.
Mm.
He wanted to be a superhero, so he came up with the one that was most superhero-ish, and Peter with the cat idea. Ace had always been kind of a spacey guy and a lover of sci-fi and stuff like that. So that's how his image comes out. And then Paul, he's the lover image. He's got the star thing going. So yeah, the character thing was a smart thing that you can now. It gave everybody something to talk about. In parallel with the fact that it's four guys, so it's not five. It's not this large number. So he definitely had all this great inborn sort of narrative to the band that allowed everybody to, kids to pick their favorite character.
Yeah. You talked about the scrappy New York attitude. They certainly seem to have that, and even coming up with such a bold look. They signed with Casablanca. You mentioned Bogart. Obviously, he names the record company for the Humphrey Bogart character in Casablanca, Casablanca Records.
It's Neil and Joyce. Bill Aucoin is there, so the management is there,
Okay.
and all the band are entrepreneurial about this situation. Neil comes out as this sort of brash guy from Buddha. I guess he burnt some bridges, or there was he definitely was a mover and shaker and willing to roll the dice. And that's what they did. And at one point, early on, they were fighting already with Warner Brothers. Um, Warner Brothers wanted them to ditch the makeup, and, Bill Aucoin and the band, put their foot down and said, "No, we're sticking with this," sort of thing.
It's really interesting. Um, the idea that they chose the makeup and the characters just aligned so well with that sort of young male comic book loving uh individual, and really that look caught on like that. So I guess that was something that really would resonate with a younger male audience.
Yeah, the comic book thing definitely would resonate with the younger male audience, but I think what is best about this, and this gets a little contentious, but they say that the UK glam situation, like, 1970 to 1974 UK glam bands, they say glam didn't caught on because America was not ready for the androgyny or the gay overtones
Right.
of that whole thing, right?
Right.
Um and so there never really was a glam scene in America. I mean, you could think of the New York Dolls. They actually pulled off that look, and you can think of Alice Cooper, where it seemed a little more piecemeal with the whole thing. David Bowie was kind of the leader of the UK glam thing. So it's kind of a lazy conceit to attach Kiss to any kind of a glam scene because number 1, they pulled it off. It doesn't look particularly glam, and like I say, they pulled it off, and, there really wasn't a glam scene in America. I mean,
So you're saying that Kiss added a level of testosterone to that look that kind of pushed it through.
yes, that's a good way of putting it, Dave. Like, definitely there's a level of testosterone there. I'm looking at the cover of the book here, and you've got, this is later, obviously, '76, but, Gene looked positively scary. He spit blood. He breathed fire. He's got the dragon boots on.
Yeah.
Um,
Very
you know,
aggressive.
Paul's got the hairy chest. They all got the long hair. Peter looks cool. Peter looks cool in every picture. Everybody thought Kiss looked absolutely cool. We used
Yeah.
to we used to call them the Oakland Raiders of rock, and we used to call the Oakland Raiders the Kiss of the NFL.
There you go.
They just looked cool.
That first album comes out in February '74, simply called Kiss, contains key songs like Strutter, Nothing to Lose, Deuce.
This album has kind of a uniform hard rock sound that I consider kind of like a chordal sound rather than a riffy sound. So it's a little bit like the Morrissey catalog. Morrissey's kind of this guy that not the Smiths, Morrissey. Morrissey is I play those albums. I love Morrissey. I love those albums, and I play them and I go, I don't know how to describe this music. It's really interesting track to track. Nobody else sounds like the Morrissey albums, yet every single thing they do is very conservative in one way or another. Kiss was kind of like that in that it didn't sound like the earlier heavy metal from the UK. The only thing I can kind of compare Kiss to is the very heaviest stuff you got from Slade and the very heaviest stuff you got from Bachman Turner Overdrive. It didn't sound like Aerosmith. It didn't sound like Ted Nugent. Aerosmith had some stonesiness and some riffiness to it that Kiss didn't have. Ted Nugent had some riffiness. Kind of riffiness is really all there is. Kiss essentially had it sounded like the edges were sawed off a little bit, yet it was heavy and aggressive sounding. But as I said earlier, it's a little more chordal sounding. You think of the first Year I Heap album, Look at Yourself, In Rock, Machine Head, Paranoid. There are these masterpieces of heavy metal that are being made by British people. American heavy metal is almost never very impressive. It almost never catches up to what the UK was doing. But I think Kiss, as I said earlier, you do get this fulcrum shift where those bands fade starting in around 1975.
So basically, this is, I think, this jumping off point, '74, where things start to, they appear on ABC's In Concert. They're odd to meet Dick Clark. The same day they aired on the Mike Douglas Show in March '74. And then they come out in October with Hotter Than Hell, which has Let Me Go Rock and Roll, Hotter Than Hell. And did the sound change on that second record? Did it, like, I sensed some sped up, heavier metal.
There is kind of an extra layer of darkness, and it does seem a little heavier. But the main thing that causes that album, that darkness, is a very extreme and controversial. A lot of people don't like it recording. So the recording is very turgid and muddy. And it slows the songs down. They sound like they're in molasses almost.
Okay.
So there is that, causes the album. A song like Strutter, for example, and Cat Scratch Fever has this as well, where I think of the Boogie AB switch, where what that means is that, um there is modern heavy metal chordage and riffing, marbled with boogie structure here and there. So Strutter, if you can think of that in your head, the chorus is modern heavy metal, the verse is boogie rock from the '50s. So that's the Boogie A B switch. You can listen to a lot of Kiss songs and sit there with a switch and go A, B, A, B. A being modern, say, call that your modern heavy metal, and B being your boogie rock. So Kiss has moved on from the British blues boom. And in fact, any sort of links to old time rock and roll almost do come filtered through a subtle love of the UK glam scene.
Next, a strange random occurrence at a high school in Indiana in 1975 indirectly gives Kiss a major asset they take into the future.
I'm Alan Kozin, a former music reviewer for the New York Times and co-author with Adrian Sinclair of The McCartney Legacy, a multi-volume biography of Paul McCartney focusing on his career after the Beatles. You're listening to the Garage to Stadium's Music History podcast, telling the stories of our music legends.
The 75 period, they continue this national exposure. They get on a midnight special in May 75. And I'd love you to tell quickly the story of the high school in Indiana in 1975 that adopted Kiss and really came up with a creation that spawned a unique asset for Kiss. Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, so what happens there is that, Bill Starkey and Jay Evans, in Terre Haute,
Terre Haute,
they
Indiana.
yes, they start calling the radio station demanding them to play Kiss songs, and they start saying, "We're the Kiss Army." And I think they even threatened to blow up the station or something. But so they're calling in and getting other people to call in, and the radio station kind of picks up on this. And I think there's a petition that happens. And so fairly early on, they get some success in that, all of this promotion helps them sell out a 10,000 seater here. And so they start the Kiss Army, and in their little indie way, and then eventually Kiss catches on to the whole thing, and they sort of it's a little hazy the way it gets taken over. I don't think there's any ill will or anything there, but at one point Kiss decides, well, we got to formalize this and run this like a
Yeah.
proper business. So they eventually take it over, and at one point, it's rumored that they're making like $5,000 a day at it or whatever. And I think the most formal coming out party for the idea of the Kiss Army is when you get the inner sleeve to Destroyer, and there's that great looking, it's orange and black, and it looks really cool, and then it outlines the whole thing of how to join the Kiss Army, and I joined at that point.
Next, Kiss's first 3 albums have not sold that well, and the band is desperate. And their record company, Casablanca, is near bankruptcy. But they collectively sit down and come up with a brilliant strategy to save the company and the band.
Want more Garage to Stadiums? Visit us on Instagram, YouTube, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
So what happens at this point is Casablanca's running out of money. Kiss is getting some press, but they're not selling any records. They've got 3 records out at this point. Dress to Kill came out as well. So 2 in '74, 1 in '75 so far, the studio album, Dress to Kill. And they can't even afford to send them back into the studio. So they come up with this idea of doing the live album. And again, Neil's entrepreneurial, the band is entrepreneurial, so is Bill Aucoin. There's the stories of Bill Aucoin maxing out his credit cards and second mortgaging his house and all this stuff. So they make this live album, and it's a double live album, gatefold. It's got an insert. It's got those cool little letters written by the band. It's got one of the most iconic live shots of all time, which is very staged. Nobody's ever going to look like that particularly on stage, but it's amazing looking. And Eddie Kramer does a great job of capturing, there's obviously some major doctoring going on here, but they do a great job of capturing uh, these songs that have kind of varied but competent enough productions across the first three albums. They pick mostly the pretty much the heaviest material, and they've got crowds screaming throughout, and these songs just come alive. The name of the album is Alive with an exclamation mark. And it just makes the band look really big. Casablanca, everybody's rolling the dice, spending a lot on this packaging. There's a lot of ads. I remember there was always promotion of the album. That album kicked off absolute mania for Kiss.
Next, the band creates a song that will take them to the top of the charts and attract an entirely new segment of fans.
Want another peek behind the garage door? Check out garagetostadiums.com for bonus content on each episode.
We get to peak Kiss here with the next album. And your book chronicles that year, Kiss 76, 12 months that defined the hottest band in the land. And in March of 76, the next album features Alice Cooper producer Bob Ezrin, who would go on to produce a ton of seminal works by the likes of Pink Floyd, Aerosmith, U2, Peter Gabriel, and even Taylor Swift, Jay-Z. The album contains hits Shout It Out Loud, Detroit Rock City, and the song that crossed into mainstream radio formats, Beth. I think Beth became the late 70s staple at high school dances. The album went to number 11, and Bob Ezrin came aboard. I mean, that was kind of the Alice Cooper connection that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so for this record, we get the badass title, we get the badass album cover, illustrated, makes them look important. The cover of Kiss Alive made them look important. They absolutely look like superheroes at this point. It's a pinnacle, the purple, the orange, the smoke and flames and all that. It's an amazing package, first of all. And so what happens is they bring in Bob Ezrin. Bob Ezrin, he makes Alice Cooper into a star. He takes charge. It's super high fidelity and well produced. So it sounds really, really good. It's Kiss's best produced album so far, just from a strictly fidelity point of view. It's got all this great sort of spoken word and soundtracky bits and weird production, and it's got some orchestration on it. It's got children's choir on it. And he routines the band really hard, makes them work really hard. He throws out a bunch of songs, and he's in on the credits and stuff. A lot of people thought they were trying to be too smarty pants. They got some bad reviews. And I guess they must have had thin skin about it, or feeling a little bit of lack of confidence because they didn't have Bob Ezrin back for the next one.
Yeah, which I found interesting. Here's this album that was absolutely a destroyer in the market. It was great. And then he doesn't get asked for the next one. And I found what's actually interesting is he was tearing apart songs like you mentioned earlier. And the song that I guess you hate, but really broke them into mainstream radio and got a ton of female fans finally for the band, was that song, Beth, which apparently Peter Criss wrote originally. It was called Beck, for a girl named Becky, who was a girlfriend of a bandmate in a previous band. And Ezrin takes this song, which is a folk song, and he basically turns it into a piano ballad, is what you wrote in the book, which I found very interesting.
Right, and it was the B-side, and it got flipped over, and then people started playing it, sort of thing. So yeah, it's a very uncharacteristic song for them, and it works out to be this. Peter comes out from the drums, and there's people throw him roses and all this sort of stuff. I don't think they I don't feel like Bob Ezrin wasn't brought back because of Beth, or that Kiss even hated the song Beth. I mean, they loved what it did for them business wise. On the next album, they were going to give us Hard Luck Woman again. So they gave us more of like an up-tempo acoustic guitar ballad, but it was a ballad again.
The Rock and Roll Over, the next 76 album, which you chronicle very well, listing all the tracks and going through the album in your book, November 76, you just mentioned it, Hard Luck Woman, sung by Peter Criss. Calling Doctor Love by Gene Simmons. This band is very versatile, as you said earlier. Several people capably take the lead vocals in the band, which is, it's rare that you'd have several lead vocalists that are capable.
But you're right. A lot of the versatility comes in the fact that we've got Gene's very interesting voice with different gears, and you get a certain personality out of him. You get Paul's very interesting voice with a lot of vocal fry. Actually, Ace and Peter both also have a lot of vocal fry. So you had four guys with interesting voices, and you had three good singers. Ace was probably the weak link when it came to the singing. He wasn't very precise, and he didn't have a lot of confidence. He gave it the old college try, but every single one of those guys in that band has an interesting voice, so that helped as well, and that possibly aligned them a little bit with, the Beatles situation. It possibly aligned them a little bit with anybody who wanted to denigrate them as a boy band, as did, the idea of the characters. Peter Criss always gets, compared to Rod Stewart. He also has a really interesting, cool singing style. He seems to be able to do that thing effortlessly. And it's just really cool that he's just, in quote marks, the drummer in the band. So he's in there doing some vocals. He does Hard Luck Woman.
Interesting story about Hard Luck One was that Paul Stanley wrote that in the spirit of Maggie May and You Wear It Well songs by Rod Stewart with the idea of pitching it to Rod. But Kiss decided to keep it and put raspy voice Peter Criss, who had a voice similar to Rod's, as you just said. You mentioned that in the book.
You really get this cool secret weapon in this band that all four of them can sing.
Next, the band plans a marketing campaign that will ultimately become a massive moneymaker for decades to come.
Do you love Rush, AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, and Fleetwood Mac? Listen to more Garage to Stadiums on all podcast streaming platforms.
As they move through 1976, what is happening is, even though they're not going to be selling as many records as Frampton Comes Alive or Fleetwood Mac, or Fleetwood Mac Rumors, or Boston eventually is going to take off in a huge way. They're selling tons and tons of tickets. They're on the covers of magazines. They're getting loads of press. Every record's getting reviewed all over the place. They're in newspapers all the time. A lot of that is the image, but they also, pretty quickly ramp up the merchandising thing. So even it's almost like their weak point as they're moving through 76 and 77 and 78 is the record sales. But when you take the entire business model all together, they're as big as all those other bands.
76, 77, Martin, this is where everyone at school seemed to be turning up with Kiss lunchboxes, thermoses, T-shirts. This band was a pioneer in this department. How did they come up to this kind of strategy? Because it was brilliant in capitalizing on the band and reinforcing their brand awareness. Major, toys, including a Marvel comic book. It's unbelievably brilliant to get to that same demographic.
I would credit Gene Simmons and Bill Aucoin the most. So the manager and Gene, who is always like a big marketing guy, and as we talked about earlier, he's really coming from that love of comics. Kiss is just totally made for it because, like I say, they absolutely pull off this look. They've got this great logo. The name of the band's only got 4 letters in it. And they've got all this great album cover art to capitalize on as well. So yeah, you're right. It's just perfect. And it looked great on Halloween. Or what great Halloween costumes everybody, from this era would go out once or twice or more times as Kiss characters on Halloween. All that TV stuff, it quickly became obvious they looked great on TV. TV was appointment TV at this time. If you missed it, you didn't have that thing to talk about at school the next day with everybody else, and they just looked absolutely glorious in these costumes.
Mm-hmm. The Love Gun album comes in 77. It climbs to number 4, and it seems the brand building is really paying off with the album sales, because it really doesn't have an obvious hit like some of the other albums, would you say?
Yeah, that album just feels like let's follow the formula of rock and roll over again. There's not a lot of major changes. Probably even the exact same number of songs on it. roughly the same length. And then they keep busy again, and they put out Kiss Alive 2.
Right.
So they have 2 albums in '77, and Kiss Alive 2 is 3 sides live and 1 side studio. So they have 1.5 studio albums in '77 and I guess 1.5 live albums in '77.
And Shout It Out Loud was re-released as a single. This is the era where you start talking about the classic jumping the shark, a la the famous Happy Days episode where the Fonz jumps a shark cage wearing a leather jacket while on water skis, of all things. And he they put out 4 solo albums simultaneously by all members on the same day. As you wrote in your book, an audacious move that turned into a debacle, wrote Martin Popoff.
I mean, they kind of jumped the shark 4 times.
Yeah.
They
The
well,
mo-
actually,
Are you talking about
sorry,
you're talking about the movie?
okay, so they actually jumped the shark 8 times. So with the 4 studio albums, the movie, which I forgot about, thank you for reminding me, and with the disco song, and with the pop album, and with the concept album. So they're jumping, and arguably the comic book too.
Yeah.
So all of these things are things that are kind of gonna push the old school Kiss fan away a little bit, especially as, there's always gonna be up and coming new bands. You've got the rise of the new wave of British heavy metal, and I remember as kids, at that point, we were like, "Oh, yes, please, give us all these UK bands again. This is awesome. Kiss who?" sort of thing.
Yeah, that made-for-TV superhero movie produced by Hanna-Barbera, it is awful. They've officially jumped the shark, I think you said it. It was kind of a rip-off. It's called Phantom of the Park, I guess a Phantom of the Opera, like crash and burn exercise. You mentioned a song here. I think it gets a lot of criticism on the next album, Dynasty, released in '79. It may have their biggest hit ever, I Was Made for Loving You. What is it about this song that people say it has a disco flavor? Is it just the beat of the song? Like, what the heck? Why are people so critical of this thing?
Well, it definitely is a disco song, because of the beat and the chorus, I would say, with the slightly falsetto-ish, I suppose you would call that, sort of vocal, the title, "I Was Made for Loving You." Um, but,
How come Mick
unfor
Jagger can get away with falsetto, but Paul Stanley can't?
Yeah, yeah, I do like Mick Jagger's falsetto. I think that is pretty cool. Huge hit. That album goes platinum. Um, and these days, decades later, it's considered Kiss's most famous song.
Next, the band realizes it needs something to regenerate their careers, and a surprising act takes place that will put them into the next generation, minus one of their famous trademarks.
Do you love Bruce Springsteen, Fleetwood Mac, David Bowie, and The Who? Listen to more Garage to Stadiums on all podcast streaming platforms.
We get to the point where the original 4 members are not getting along. Take us into the personalities of the band, starting with Gene and Paul, and then maybe Ace and Peter, because we got to get some clues here of the breakup from your perspective of their personalities of the guys.
Yeah, I think Gene and Paul are always the guys with their eye on the prize. They're level-headed. They're willing to work hard and get this done. And Peter and Ace are the loose cannons, the drug and the drink, the woman problems, all that stuff, crashing cars. So that's kind of what happens. There starts to be this divide. Um, you know, uh, I think this isn't a situation like Queen where everybody is super enthusiastic about wanting to get their songs on the album and all being great writers. I think there's even some laziness, and just these guys being together for so long and being so pressurized for so long, being super, super busy. 2 records in '74, 2 in '76, sort of 2 in '77, four solo albums all at once. So they touring the entire time. So the pressure is just getting to them at this point, and you're right. There's going to be a fracture with Paul and Gene kind of keeping things, and then Ace and Peter dropping out.
The decision to take the makeup off, 1983, I think it was. They came out with "Lick It Up," which became MTV helped make this album a success. What was the what were we just at the end of the line with the kabuki makeup? The comic book characters, we just got the end and they had to do something to keep the PR moving. What was the real reason?
I think that's a great way to frame it. I mean, I can picture these guys all sitting around a table, and going, "Okay, we need a new idea. What's our next idea? Take the makeup off." Right? So it's run its course. Obviously, whatever is not working for them, you can just throw the makeup into the same basket and saying this isn't working for them because nothing's working for them. So they do that, and incredibly, they're kind of like Johnny on the spot for this new renaissance of heavy metal called hair metal. They're there in the ground zero year,
Yeah.
along with Quiet Riot. Twisted Sister's kind of in there at the same time. They're coming on right around this ground zero year. And they do well. They do well with it. They get a hit. Lick It Up is this insanely simple but hooky song, daringly simple. They, lo and behold, become what I consider pretty much the quintessential hair metal band. They're the most prolific. They adopt the clothing to the most, like, cliche standard out of all the hair metal bands, as David Coverdale says, dressing like a Christmas tree.
Kiss starts to do that in this era, but you're right. They nailed
Mhm.
that hair metal and got some commercial success out of these albums from, MTV exposure. It's incredible that they because no one who the heck's buying Kiss lunchboxes at this point? That's way past.
Yeah, and I really applaud them for the fact that they packed a lunch and went to work and made a lot of records. So they are in there, you know, neck and neck with all the young guys. They're getting some golds and platinums out of this, but there are other bands that are effortlessly gonna zoom way past them. Cinderella's gonna do way better, Poison's gonna do way better, Skid Row, Guns N' Roses. So there's a bunch of bands that do better than Kiss, who are baby bands, you who grew up on Kiss. But still, I think Kiss is one of the bands. They're one of the few bands that actually is there at the very beginning of hair metal doing well immediately, and they're there at the very end of hair metal still doing well.
96 Kiss Unplugged live performance for MTV. Kind of Peter Criss and Ace Frehley come back and do some songs even on that show. But that really sparks a little bit of a nostalgia for Kiss, and they embark on a massive reunion tour with the original members with the full makeup. And we're back to sort of, I guess, the touring jukebox phase where Kiss is going to go back and play the characters again. Is that correct?
Yeah, at this point, it's kind of patchy. We are now on our victory lap, but yeah, there is this great nostalgia for them. They come back, the same four guys. They still look great in the makeup, so that's cool. The Unplugged thing happens to be, one of the hit albums of the Unplugged era. It's generally well received. Paul's one of these guys who will repeat that interesting quote. I always like that quote that says, the mark of a good song is you can sit with an acoustic guitar and play it.
Mm.
But we are into the phase where, it's all about the merch, it's all about that victory lap, sell the tickets of the reunion band.
In 2014, Tom Morello inducts Kiss into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. 2025, Ace Frehley dies at age 74. When history is told, Martin, of the music industry, what will they say about Kiss?
Well, I think the main thing we are going to remember really is that look, is the look of the band. I think imprinted on our minds forever are literally, I think even if you're just a casual music fan, all four of those faces. You're not going to forget those faces. But I think the best thing we can say about Kiss is that they absolutely raised the standard in a really dramatic way for what fans should expect from a live show. And after Kiss, there will be non-makeup bands who don't even, who would even poo-poo the fact of dressing up in particularly extravagantly for to go on stage, who will have massive, massive stage shows. And then there will be bands that will take what Kiss was doing to the next degrees, your Slipknots,
Yeah.
even your Motley Crue, early on, your Marilyn Mansons. So right across the board, even into new country and into pop, into Taylor Swift, I think Kiss got that ball rolling probably in about, what would you say, late 1974,
Yeah.
1975. I think they caused it's almost as if they caused the live the live end of the music industry to triple and quadruple in size
Yeah. I
versus
think
what it used to be technology wise and the amount of trucks and people needed to pull off a stage show.
I think that's a really insightful comment. On our Alice Cooper episode, we talked about how Alice kind of paved the way for that stage, that Welcome to My Nightmare, that whole hanging and executions and all that horror stuff. And Kiss, I think, took that and turbocharged it. And as you
Yeah.
said, set the stage for what today is a common thing. These shows are extravagant productions, and Kiss certainly were pioneers in that. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, it's like they forced everybody else to speed up their development
Yeah.
and or to catch up with Kiss. I think the amount of money and creativity that they threw into their show caused music across the board
Mm,
for everybody to step up their game.
yep.
And they would go into interviews and say as much, right? They would goad bands on and say, "Look, man, we're entertaining. That band ain't entertaining. We are. Come see
Yeah.
us."
Well, today we've had Martin Popoff back. He was on our AC/DC episode, and he has written about Kiss, Kiss at 50, and Kiss 76, 12 months that defined the hottest band in the land. And Martin, we want to thank you because you took us back, a lot of us, to our youth and those mid 70s, late 70s periods when Kiss rocked and rolled all night. And then you showed us really how this band was savvy enough to kind of adapt and really play a role in another era, the hair metal era. And then they were savvy enough to go, hey, let's put the makeup back on and make some more money and all the merchandising that goes with it. So you've really illuminated us today on these guys, and we wanted to thank you for coming back.
Very cool. Thank you, Dave.
Formed in New York City in 1973, Kiss is one of the best-selling bands of all time. They are famous not only for their 100+ million records sold in theatrics, but also for a massive portfolio of over 3,000 licensed merchandise items. As we mentioned in the episode, Kiss has a fervent fan base and were known as the Kiss Army. And as we discussed, it was actually started in 1974 by fans in Indiana who protested a local radio station for refusing to play the band's music. Kiss is well known for its merchandise, as we discussed, and the band even launched a branded Kiss casket in the early 2000s as something that can be used at funerals. Notably, Pantera guitarist Daryl Abbott, known professionally as Dimebag Darrell, was buried in one at his own request. In 1977, Kiss became the first band since the Beatles to have 4 albums on the Billboard Hot 100 chart at the same time. Their albums, Alive, Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over, and The Originals. The famous lightning bolt SS logo in the word Kiss was originally sketched by original guitarist Ace Frehley. Incredibly, despite their massive cultural footprint and 30 gold records, Kiss has never scored a US #1 single. Their highest charting single was the soft rock ballad Beth from Destroyer, which peaked at #7. Co-founder of Kiss, Gene Simmons, has claimed to never ever have consumed drugs or alcohol through his entire rock and roll career. Gene Simmons also had a career before Kiss. He originally studied education and wanted to be a rabbi. He worked as a 6th grade teacher in Spanish Harlem before joining the band. Before landing on the band name Kiss, the band considered names like Albatross, the Crimson Harpoon, and even the F Word, which was a favorite of Gene Simmons. Although fiercely protective of the Kiss brand, in 2012 the band embarked on a line of co-branded merchandise with fictional Japanese pussycat Hello Kitty.
There are t-shirts, mugs, vinyl figures, and badges depicting the cute white cartoon Moggy in Kiss makeup, but the highlight of the range is surely the toilet paper, as tested by Mike Tyson at the product launch in Las Vegas. Gene Simmons discovered a famous band when they were an unknown bar band playing in California in 1976. Simmons saw the young unsigned band playing at the Starwood Club in West Hollywood and was blown away. The band, Van Halen. He flew the band to New York, put them up, and paid for them to record 15 tracks at the legendary Electric Lady Studios. Simmons tried to get Kiss management and his bandmates on board to sign Van Halen. When they showed no interest, he tore up the management contract, telling the band they were free to seek a deal elsewhere. And shortly after, they were successfully signed by Warner Brothers Records and became a rock phenomenon. Special thanks to our guest, Martin Popoff, author of Kiss 76, 12 Months That Defined the Hottest Band in the Land. For more on today's episode, visit GarageToStadiums.com, where you'll find bonus content on how Kiss borrowed glam rock spectacle while making it resonate with everyday American rock fans, with links to rare concert footage. You can also find us on Instagram, X, and other social platforms for daily music history insights delivered straight to your feed. And follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube to stay up to date when our new episodes drop. Thanks to our production crew, Scott Campbell, Chad Raymond, Amelia Marianne, and Nigel Campbell. I'm Dave Anthony. Thanks for listening. Join us next time for another Garage to Stadium story.
Another Blast Furnace Labs production.